Hi, folks. With Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the meaning of productivity. And I'm talking in national terms. I mean, you could break it down to, per company, per business, per factory, and that sort of stuff. And I'm talking now in national terms. What is the productivity of labour in effect? And now, for many years now, the productivity of labour has been declining and declining quite sharply. And two productivities have come out of the modern era. And I guess they always existed, but they've now really come into the forefront, and one has superseded the other. Productivity was a measurement of output, and in simple terms, how many workers are there in the factory to produce how many widgets, per week, day, month, whatever. And what is the use of, say, capital equipment, lathes, machines, processing equipment, or whatever, canning and bottling and so on. So what is the amount of automation or robotics that are applied? And this in turn affects the amount of labour. Similarly, once you have a lot of equipment and robotics, some of it quite complicated, that has various settings that have to be made and monitored, high-tech maintenance and that sort of thing. You have workers doing it, but these are high-skilled workers, and high-skilled workers tend to have high productivity output. So they're paid more, but they do far more complicated things that feed into higher levels of overall productivity. Now, that was traditionally the measurement, and we go back, if you like, to the classic sort of Henry Ford, manufacturing there, where there's how many workers does it take to produce, say, in a production line, as in Henry Ford's case, how many workers does it take to produce X amount of cars? And Ford had an idea that the raw materials, the iron and the steel and the wood and the leather and whatever else goes in one door, and the finished car, and that was his vision, the finished automobile goes out the other end and goes off to the car dealership and is sold. So that was Ford's vision there. So that was the classic early iteration of how we would look at modern factory type productivity. And that went on for 70, 80 years, that concept of productivity. So productivity of output, and certainly productivity as you would measure in a manufacturing economy was heavily based on that. So now there's different strands of productivity within that. For example, producing high quality goods, producing goods at an affordable price. What is the cost of production? There's design designed in such a way that the product can be put together more easily or more cheaply, or with less complication. And so there's a whole lot that feeds into the productivity, but the equation comes back to the same thing. How many widgets are you producing, and what is the cost of production in people and in technical equipment such as robotics and automation? So productivity of output, that was the equation. That's how it worked. Now, in a manufacturing economy, productivity of output plays a big role. Less so in service economies, where you can't. It's far more difficult because you can plan things around product. Okay, we're going to produce 100 widgets this week. What do we need to do? We need, the factory, and we need 3 shifts and 50 workers per shift, for example. So that's very plannable. It's very controllable. The variables are reduced to a very small level, and you can create high levels of productivity based around the planning and the organization and the structure. Service industries are different. You don't control that many variables. So you've got a shop somewhere, selling, I don't know, clothing, and you don't know, is it going to be pouring with rain that day or that week? Is it going to be very hot? Is it going to be very cold? How many customers will come in? There's a whole lot of variables that you don't control in a service industry. And the demand the demand for the product and the demand for service to help the product, a shop assistant to help the customer, this sort of thing. Those are variables that you've got some, but not a lot of control over. You can put control over and say, like, we're only going to have one employee in the shop, that's it. And that gives us control over the variables and thus the costs. But then hundreds, if not thousands of customers come in, they can't get service, they walk out. So you've got an opportunity cost factor there where you could have got sales from those customers, but you don't. So there's two ends to the productivity in service industries. You control cost to a level where, on balance of probability, it's going to be enough. But what if it isn't? You then lose sales, that opportunity cost, as customers walk out the door. So there's two sort of variables, or a number of variables in the service industries that make productivity much harder. Now, productivity began to be decoupled from productivity of output, decoupled from pretty much all the Western economies for two things. The first wave was offshoring jobs or outsourcing jobs to third world economies, surplus population economies, China, India, and so on. Now, the wages were much lower there, but the productivity nosedived. It went off the fucking cliff. In India, for example, and say a steel mill, which was a classic case, their productivity is somewhere around a fifth of what the productivity is in the West. Now, that's due to lower levels of training. The organizational structure is not so good, and it's just the inefficiency of the operation, less capital equipment, those sorts of things. But because the wages were so different, that is, far cheaper in India, sometimes a 20th of what the Western worker was paid, even though it was the productivity nosedived fivefold. And for every one Western worker that was doing the job, you would need 5 or 6 Indian workers to get the same output. But because labor was so cheap, the Indians don't invest in, this is the scenario I've looked at, the Indians don't invest in the same level of capital equipment or the sort of training or sophistication that goes into creating a productive output in that type of production environment. So even because wages were so much cheaper, the lower productivity, very much lower, was tolerated. So okay, we can offset one. Sure, productivity's gone to shit. Sure, productivity's died on the ass. But look how cheap the fucking wages are. So we can say, okay, for the money we invest, we have higher productivity of the money we're investing, even though we have lower productivity in output terms. And that became then the modern equation. And it got even worse. Then mass migration coming in of lots of peasant labor from all these surplus populations, people in Somalia with an IQ of 75 and all this thing. And this is very common around these third world surplus population countries. And they come into the Western world and they have not only low productivity jobs, but because their wages are so much lower, a lot of it illegal, then why should they get quality managerial oversight? Well, they don't need it. Look at the fucking wages, are so cheap. Just give them some shit job to do. Tell them, clean that fucking toilet. And so the managerial oversight and the quality of the management, the organizational structures underwriting their work, that's thrown out the window as well. And the whole basis of productivity isn't productivity, it's just cheap labor. And so that arbitrage between cheap labor and loss of productive output has even come into the West now, particularly say in the United States, not just in cleaning, but in things like take out food, hot to go food and all this sort of stuff. It's affected that, hotels and the like. So you're just talking to a hotel manager, they tell me that the productivity of these third world workers isn't very good, but that's fine because they're paid such shit money, and they're given like free food and things like that. But then it's not really free; it's deducted from their wages. So they may be only getting $2 or $3 an hour, but they've got other stuff like food and drink or I don't know, transport or something thrown in. So and they're not productive people. They're not cleaning the rooms quickly and efficiently, but because they're so cheap, who cares? I can employ 3, 4, 5, 6 people of these peasants compared to one local person. Now, sure, the local person is a better worker. Sure, that they can follow instructions and this, and they do a better job. Okay, all of that's true, but I still can employ 6 of these peasants compared to one here. So while productivity nosedives and falls off a cliff, the relationship between wages and getting the job done, that's still worthwhile doing it, even though the productivity is lower. And also, we can churn them and burn them. We don't have to invest time training them, or any, we don't have to do that, and we don't have to give them quality supervision. We just give them some other third world peasant to be the overseer or the foreman or something like that, and all that person needs to do is scream and threaten them with getting fired if they don't do what they're told to do, that sort of thing. So the whole management structure is piss poor training and all these sorts of things. Now, with the mass influx of third world peasants and third world people to the West generally, not just the United States, but Australia and the United States, Canada, Britain, and so on, then there's been this very substantial decrease in worker productivity. So there's fewer and fewer productive workers. Then on top of that, you add diversity, affirmative action, hiring, all this sort of stuff. You add all that in, and you can see where productivity is dying. Now, on top of that, the managerial, organizational structure of managers that typically would be the ones watching out for productivity of output and so on, they've been got rid of. There were straight white males were doing that. They've pretty much all gone, and they've been replaced with the proverbial black lesbian and so on. So there's no incentive or impetus or even the capability within the structure to place an emphasis on productivity of output. But what we've noticed with President Trump's policies of stopping the mass inflow of illiterate third world low IQ peasants into the United States and the deportation, I think in the last 12 months there've been some in the order of 2.5 million, give or take, have been expelled. Far less than needs to be, but even that is already showing up in the productivity statistics, that productivity is starting to increase. Now, when productivity increases, then wages begin to climb at a faster rate, and then you achieve over a period of time, you come much closer to a parity with wage increases and cost of living, which is, of course, in the West where we all want to get to. But I did want to place emphasis on this, that when cheap labour is dangled in front of businesses, corporates, multinationals, and so on, they'll tend to make a dash for that, thinking, look at all that cheap labour, look, wow, look, hey, when in reality they're embracing super low productivity, which ultimately inverts the whole productivity equation and means that we're actually going backwards overall, not forwards. You've been Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.